Save a camera for them. Started this process about a year ago.
Family and friends, please place your eyes at the rear of my vehicle as the honor guard will receive your loved one and transfer him over to the case. Family and friends, at this time I'm going to ask if everyone will return back to your vehicle so we may continue on in this session again. At this time, please return back to your vehicles, please. I'm going to ask you please follow a safe distance behind this caisson, so if something was to happen, you have enough time to react.
Oh, no problem.
I'm going to depart you at this time because I'm leaving the procession at graveside. But I will be standing at graveside waiting for you when you arrive there.
All right. Thank you.
picture of that signpost. McClellan was a Civil War general at Gettysburg. Halsey was an admiral that led his battle group into a hurricane, kind of was dishonored.
Please come this way, please. Please place your eyes on my vehicle and the case on it. The underguard receives your loved one and transfer them here underneath the shelf. Family and friends, at this time, I'm going to ask you to please follow us up to your loved one's resting place. Your sister? Please be seated as well. Family and friends in other chairs, please come up and have a seat if you choose. Family and friends in other chairs, please come up and have a seat. And please come in closer for you to be able to hear as well.
welcome to Arlington. For over 150 years since the Civil War, our nation has honored her fallen patriots right here at Arlington National Cemetery. This is sacred ground we're on. These hallowed marble stones that surround us stand as solemn memorials to those who answered our nation's call to serve. Some served a few years, some served many years, some made the ultimate sacrifice, but each one served so that we may have the freedom we enjoy to this day. This morning we've gathered in this garden of stones to remember and honor one of our nation's heroes. This morning we honor First Lieutenant James Raymond Mulligan. And while many of these markers bear the names of those who served, that is, those who wore the uniform with great pride, many of these markers bear the names of those who served behind the scenes, who made sacrifices in their own ways in support of their families and ultimately our nation. This morning we've gathered to remember and honor one of those heroes as well. We honor Lois Mulligan. In 1940, Jim joined the Minnesota National Guard, but about a year later, he enlisted in the United States Army. He volunteered for the glider program. However, the glider program closed due to too many casualties. Jim then transferred to the aviation cadet program. In May 1944, he reported to Algiers, North Africa. He traveled by ship, but he always said he went by rail, as that's where he spent most of his time because he was seasick. Jim flew 34 missions over Yugoslavia, Germany, Austria, Hungary, northern Italy, southern France, Greece, and Romania. His final tally was 41 missions, 25 sorties, and 196 hours. In 1945, Jim flew a secret mission to Berlin. There were two unnamed civilians aboard, a man and a woman, who parachuted over Berlin in order to make contact with the underground. On March 15, 1945, Jim was returning from a mission when his crew took heavy ground fire, followed by a second round of anti-aircraft fire. The crew had to bail out over Yugoslavia. Of 7 planes on the mission, 4 were lost. Fortunately, the entire crew returned safely, although their adventure was the stuff movies are made of. After some time recovering, Jim transferred to a bomb group in northern Italy, where he flew additional missions. Along the way, in 1943, Jim had met and married the love of his life, Lois. They were introduced by a fellow cadet. They had 3 children, Greg, Jeff, and Susan, and eventually they settled in West Covina, California, where they lived until their passing. Jim got into the dairy sales business, eventually forming his own company, Mulligan Sales, that operated until 2010. Jim and Lois enjoyed traveling in their motorhome and spending time in their cabin in Lake Arrowhead, California. Near the end of this service, we will present this flag in honor of Lieutenant Mulligan's military service, but for a moment I'd like to reflect on the service and sacrifice of Lois. She was undoubtedly the wind beneath the wings for Lieutenant Mulligan, and it's fitting that she will take her place here in this cemetery of heroes, for she too was a hero. Remembering her role as an Air Force wife, I'd like to share an adaptation of a poem entitled The Silent Ranks. She wore no uniform, no blues or camouflage green, but Lois was in the Air Force in ranks rarely seen. She had no rank on her shoulders, salutes she did not give, but the military world was the place where Lois lived. She wasn't in the chain of command, orders she did not get, but her husband, Lieutenant Mulligan, was the one who did. This she did not forget. She wasn't the one who delivered weapons, who put her life on the line, but Lois's job was just as tough. She was the one left behind. Her husband was a patriot, a brave and honorable man. The call to serve his country, not all could understand. Behind the lines, Lois saw the things that keep our country free. Her husband made the sacrifice, and so did she. She loved the man she married. Serving our country was his life. And proudly standing among the silent ranks was Lois Mulligan, a devoted Air Force wife. Will you gathered here today because Jim and Lois were special to each of you. You've come to say your final farewells and to thank God for all they meant to you. And I pray that your fond memories of them and your faith in God will sustain you today and in the days to follow. Some 3,000 years ago in ancient Israel lived a man known as King David. To this day, King David is Israel's most beloved king. But he wasn't always king. As a young lad, David was just a shepherd boy who watched over his father's flock of sheep. In time, David grew to love the sheep given to his care. One day, he recognized a correlation. The way a shepherd loves his sheep must be the way God loves his children. So David wrote a song in which he imagined himself as a sheep and God as his shepherd. We know that song to this day as the 23rd Psalm. I'd like to share the words. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me to lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside the still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup runs over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Will you join me for a prayer, please? Almighty God, will you please be a shepherd to this family, to those walking through the valley of mourning since Jim and Lois's departures. I pray they will sense the presence and comfort of you, God, our Heavenly Father. And now into the mercy of Almighty God, we commend the soul of James Raymond Mulligan and Lois Florine Mulligan, now departed, and we commit their remains to their final resting place, earth to earth, ashes to ashes, dust to dust. We do so with the sure and certain hope of the resurrection to eternal life through Jesus Christ the Lord. Amen. Just across the Potomac River near the World War II memorial stands a monument to another American hero. The inscription thereon reads, "In life he honored the flag, in death the flag shall honor him." Jim honored the flag with his service to our nation. Now it's our privilege to present our nation's flag in honor of James Raymond Mulligan, First Lieutenant, United States Air Force.
Family and friends, will you please rise for the reading of the liturgy? Choir parties off over to your left, bugles right here to your right. all the way straight in front of you underneath the outdoor green carpet. It's grade 3-8 to 5-7. James Mulligan, First Lieutenant, United States Air Force, and his wife, Lois Mulligan, United States Air Force, resting in place. On behalf of their children, they would like to thank each and every one of you for coming out and joining them on this significant occasion as they honor their parents. When you get ready to depart, I ask that you go to the stop sign, make a right-hand turn. That will take you back to the security guards where you first came in. That's Memorial Drive. Make a right-hand turn. Memorial Drive will take you back into the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area. Again, to each and every one of you, please accept my condolence for the loss of your loved ones and friends, and safe travels going back as well. Thank you. Please accept my condolence. Would you like to walk out this area?
Hi, Chris. This is your Uncle Jim. I'm returning your tape, which your grandmother delivered to me with your note, asking about some of my experiences, especially during World War II. To preface that, I was born in 1921. I'm now 75 years old, and I was born and raised in the Midwest, as your grandmother and grandfather were. I started out as a young person while going to school, working sometimes for $1 a day or less, and my lunch. And this prevailed through the Depression years. My father had a very difficult time during these years because I'm the oldest of 9 children. I have 6 brothers and 2 sisters. 3 of the boys right after me are dead today. The rest are all healthy. My folks are gone, however. I found that life during those years is something that one does not forget, in that where prices were cheap, wages were cheap or cheaper or non-existent. It was very difficult to get a job. And when one did get a job, it wasn't any great thing. It was a very menial task. Those people that had jobs were very fortunate. But I went to 13 different schools through high school. And after high school, I did not have the money to go to college. And I was told that we would probably be in the war before long, since I was in the National Guard unit in my hometown. As it turned out, I went into federal service from the state National Guard November the 29th, 1940. I'd been in the service for about a year when I took a discharge from the National Guard unit, which was had gone into federal service and was stationed down at Camp Claiborne, Louisiana. And I re-enlisted in the regular Army Air Corps. It was called the United States Army Air Corps during those years when it started. Today it's a separate branch of the service, as you know, referred to and known as the United States Air Force. I was still at Camp Claiborne waiting to be transferred to a regular Army Air Corps unit when Pearl Harbor happened, December 7th. A couple weeks later, I ended up in St. Louis, Missouri. You'd ask about interesting things that happened along the way. During my time in the National Guard unit, I made a lot of friends. I'd come off of a farm, small town, was not very sophisticated. I needed a lot of experience just to get along in life. But I can remember that before I went into the service in 1937, when I was 16 years old, I bought a car, a 1924 Dodge, for $25. The license per year was only $3. I never had insurance. I never bought a gallon of gasoline in the 4 years that I owned the car. I guess it was a little closer to 3. I never changed the oil, and I never had a flat tire. Since I had a car, I had lots of friends who didn't. And they were always wanting to go someplace. And I said, well, fine, I'll go there, but you have to buy the gas. And my stipulation was they had to buy enough gas so that I could get there and get back with some left over. With this method in place, as I say, I never bought any gas. Oh, occasionally I think I might have bought a few gallons, but for almost the entire time, I sold that car in 1940 in October for $75. I wish I had it today. I'll never forget it. But the first car that a boy has is something quite memorable. But back to 1940, I got inducted into the United States Army Air Corps in Jefferson Barracks in St. Louis, Missouri. We had ridden up there with another man, with a man that had been transferred to the Air Corps also, such as I was, plus 3 other fellows. 5 of us rode up in his car. 2 of those fellows with Bob Dow and Bob Oringer. Bob Oringer is from Charles City. It was through Bob that I met your Aunt Lois in 1941. We were stationed in St. Louis for about a year when we volunteered for a glider pilot program because we didn't want to stay in St. Louis doing clerical work. We worked in a classification center processing all the new inductees into the service right after the war. I can remember we used to be able to buy a pass in St. Louis. We could ride the streetcar for a whole week, any place, as long as we liked, for 50 cents. A terrific buy. We saw the whole city more than once. After having been there for about a year, as I say, we volunteered for the glider program. And we went from St. Louis to Smyrna, Tennessee. From there, we went to Rochester, Minnesota to start our flying. And we flew small airplanes, 65 horsepower, Cubs, Aronkas, Taylorcraft, and Fairchild. We always tried to fly the Fairchild because it had 10 horsepower more. It had 75. But we went through that program latter part of 43. I guess it was the latter part of 42 and most of 43 up till about October when the glider program was closed because they were having too many casualties in the glider program. They were coming in when they would cut them loose from their tow plane and they were crashing and too many men were being killed. A glider pilot was expected to be the pilot while you were in the air, and once you got on the ground, you became a platoon sergeant. We were staff sergeant pilots. When they closed the program, I was offered the opportunity of testing for aviation cadets. One had to have 2 years of college or pass the written exam. I had to opt for the written exam, which I passed, and went into the cadets. I trained in the cadets for almost a year and graduated as a second lieutenant. I went to a lot of places, flew a lot of places, had a lot of experiences. I never crashed an airplane. I never damaged one, other than the one that I bailed out of during the war. But I had things happen that were frightening and things that are fun. And someday we should sit down and talk about them if you'd like. But when I left the glider program and went to the cadet system, I also met another friend whom I went through cadet system with completely from beginning to end. We graduated together from Waco, Texas, Blackland Air Force Base. After graduation, I went to instructor school to become an instructor pilot. And I was an instrument flying instructor, which I did for about 5 months. At that time, they were closing the school And I was sent to B-24 transition, which means you go to fly B-24s, learn how to fly them, and all the things about them. Later on, we were assigned crews, and I was in a crew and trained in Pueblo, Colorado. In May of 1944, we sailed out of Newport News, Virginia, to Africa. We landed in Algiers and were there for about 2 weeks, stationed on a air base inland. We started our flying with the 98th Bomb Group. At that time, we were then transferred to Italy since we had captured Italy from the Germans and Italians, and we were moving forward. I did not go over the Anzio beachheads. However, I did go over Palesti on the 4th raid. History books tell about Palesti was a turning point in the war in bombing. But we arrived in Italy and were stationed in a small town south of Bari, Italy, down in the heel of Italy, called Lecce, L-E-E-C-E. It was an Italian air base which had been captured, and we renovated it for the 98th Bomb Group. I flew 34 missions from that base over Yugoslavia, Greece, Romania, Italy, Germany, southern France, Austria, and we lost a number of friends who were shot down, but I fortunately always came back. I was stationed there when I went on a mission in March 15th, 1945, and we went to Vienna, Austria, to bomb the marshalling yards. Marshalling yard is where they have their collection of their railroad train pending unloading or shipping back to various points. It's a big setup. It's really something that, looking at it from the air, is very unusual to see. We don't see it from the ground. Prior to that, 2 weeks before, I'd been on a secret mission over Berlin. I'd taken 2 people dressed as civilians, and we flew at 25,000 feet, which is quite high in those years, and in an overcast to Berlin, and dropped them off. They were going down to make contact with the German people who were the underground and opposed to Hitler. And I can remember the girl coming up. She kissed me on the cheek and she says, "Goodbye, Jim. Maybe we'll see each other someday." I've never heard from them. But back to the 15th of March, I was on the lead ship with a pilot named Charles Estes, who was the lead pilot. I was the air discipline officer on this mission. And we went over Vienna. We lost 4 airplanes out of our 7-ship formation over the target, and we were hit quite badly and lost 2 engines by the time we were 100 miles south of Vienna. After another while, we decided that the best thing to do, since we were losing altitude so rapidly, was to bail out, which we did. We all got on the ground safely, except we got injured. When I came down, I hit the edge of a stone roof building, and I broke my shoulder and my left foot and cracked a vertebrae in my back. We were picked up by Tito's partisans, taken to a small town and given medical help, and we were fed whatever they had, which wasn't much. After having been there about 4 days, we started moving by various modes of transportation. We left the small town on a hay wagon, pulled by a couple mules. Later on, we came to a small narrow gauge railroad, which we rode for a short distance. We then had to go through the German lines because we had come down behind their lines when we bailed out. We went through that by sneaking through at night. The Germans were in retreat. The Russians were pursuing them, and we were bombing them. We used to watch daily when the airplanes would go over, and we could pick out our own squadron to bomb again. A few days later, we were picked up by some different partisans, and we were taken to the mountains when we came across a German patrol. It was at night, and probably the only reason I'm alive today is that I'd kept my parachute, as most of us did, as a blanket. I was rolled up in my parachute, lying under a tree in the snow, and they didn't see me. A number of the partisans were killed. Our crew all survived, and we went on from there. 2 days later, we came across a Russian patrol. They were going after the Germans, pursuing them up through the valleys. They'd come up through Sarajevo, which is the way that we came out. We went through all of that area where they've had all this fighting and all the bloodshed here in the last couple, 3 years. It was there that we met Tito. We had dinner one evening with him and some of his people. It seemed that most of the people that we met in Yugoslavia had someone who spoke English. They'd worked in the steel mills in the United States during the 30s and made their money and went back to Yugoslavia to live. One gentleman showed me his car in a garage hidden under a woodpile. It was a 1937 Ford that had 4,000 miles on it. We went through a lot of their homes. We were invited to parties, to dances. It seemed as though they all wanted to do something for us. After about 2 weeks, we arrived in a place called Split, Yugoslavia. It's on the coast of Yugoslavia, on the northern end of the Adriatic Sea. After 2 days there, where everyone had the dysentery and felt terrible, we got on a small sailing boat and sailed down the coast of Yugoslavia to the Isle of Vis, V-I-S. There we went ashore and we got a little better food. And when that evening we got on a small steamship and went across the Adriatic Sea to Bari, Italy. When I went overseas, we went over in a Liberty ship. And I got so seasick that I wanted to die, and I couldn't. But that was nothing compared to how sick I got on this small steamer going across the Adriatic Sea. That was absolutely horrible. And I wasn't the only one. It seemed like everyone on that ship, both civilians and the 10 military people that I was with, were all the same. When we got back to Bari, Italy, we went to the hospital where they gave us a clip. They clipped all of our hair off, took all of our clothes, and threw them in an incinerator. Had us take 3 showers. And in between each shower, they would use a flit gun, which is like a thing that you spray roses with dust, and dusted us for lice. We would scratch our hair before we got there and then run down on our neck and wait till we got through scratching and then go back up into our hair. They were pretty bad. There we had ourselves taken care of. And after a couple weeks, we were sent back to our unit. Your Aunt Lois was notified that I was missing in action, but it was 2 weeks after I was missing that she got the telegram. By that time, I had arrived at a Allied mission. By Allied, I mean the United States, England, Britain, all the Allies had a mission in Yugoslavia, and the shortwave radio, they radioed out that we were alive and we were on our way out. I was never captured. We were always evaders. We came out of the hospital, went back to our units, or to our single unit, our 415th Bomb Squadron of the 98th Bomb Group. It was discovered then that they were going to be transferred back to the United States to be trained in B-29s. And since we weren't there when the decision was made to send us back, we were not on orders to come back, but rather we were transferred to a new unit. I was transferred to the 465th Bomb Group, 780th Bomb Squadron in Foggia, Italy. Actually, a small town outside of it. It's very difficult to find, called Cerignola. The operations officer of that squadron was missing in action for about a week. But the commanding officer of that squadron turned out to be a student of mine, a student officer. In other words, an officer going through getting pilot training, whether he was an officer or not, as a cadet. He saw my name on the transfer into the group and picked me up, took me to the squadron, and he says, "You're the new operations officer." That was on about the 3rd of May. We flew a mission every day from that time on till the 8th, when Germany surrendered. After that happened, we were then disbanding the unit, and we were shipping everything home to the United States. Being operations officer, I was one of the last people to leave the squadron, and I was transferred to a unit in Bari, Italy, which also was an operational unit, scheduling pilots to fly back to the United States. After being there until July, I finally worked it around to get myself put on one of the orders. So I then flew back from Italy to Africa, to the Azore Islands, eventually to Ganderfield, Newfoundland, and into Hartford, Connecticut. When I was ready to take off from for Ganderfield from the Azores, I had trouble with an engine. So I went back in to the hard stand where you park airplanes, and we changed the magneto on the thing. During that time, I went to operations and advised them to tell Ganderfield, Newfoundland, that we were delayed taking off. And the delay was about 3 or 3.5 hours. The flight from the Azores to Ganderfield was just about the maximum distance we could fly in a B-24. We were on our way when an airplane was calling our call numbers. It was a search and rescue. We were so long overdue getting to Ganderfield that they thought we were in the drink and they were looking for us. I told them on the radio that if he'd look up at about 11 o'clock, about 5,000 feet above them, they'd probably see me. His expression was, "What the hell you doing up there?" I said, "This is where I'm supposed to be, not down there." He laughed. He says, "Yeah, I guess you're right." He says, what's the deal?" I said, "I wired Gander from the Azores that I was going to be about 3.5 hours late taking off. That should have been recorded. We're not missing. We're on our way. Everything's fine." We landed in Ganderfield in a snowstorm. That wasn't pleasant, but we stayed there for a day. The snow passed. They plowed the runway, and we took off for Hartford. When we landed in Hartford, Connecticut, we taxied up, and they parked the airplanes. They told us to take all of our gear out. But before any of that happened, I was sitting in the seat, looking out the window, when a Red Cross canteen truck pulled up. And she didn't ask me what I would like. She just looked up at me and she said, "Would you like a pint or would you like a quart?" I said, "I will take a quart." And she was talking about milk. Everybody on the airplane just sat down where they were and drank a quart of milk. And we ate cupcakes. It seems as though we couldn't get enough milk, salads, or desserts when we got back. Those were the things we missed. I went from there to the separation center from the airplanes and turned it in all the rest of our equipment. And we were told if there was anything in any of the piles we wanted, we could go and help ourselves. Which we did. We took a number of things and brought them home because all they were going to do was throw it in the junk. I went from there to St. Louis again, to Jefferson Barracks. And just before I got there, I called your Aunt Lois and told her that I was there. She and I had gotten married when I was in Waco, Texas, in November 1943, when I was in basic training, flying BT-13s. Your grandmother, Jean, was a bridesmaid. And we got married in Winfield, Kansas. We went back there about 26 years later and visited the church and looked around where we had gotten married. You speak of values. We had a wedding, and then we had a wedding dinner, at which we had 11 people. We had a cake. We all had steak. And the bill was only $25, including the tip. It's hard to believe the difference in the values one has today and what they are and were then. I know this is rather sketchy. It's not maybe what you all want or need, but to my recollections, it's about as close as I can come without branching off into a lot of details. But I've been married to your Aunt Lois, coming on 54 years, and it's been very wonderful. And you know your cousins, and your second cousins, and I hope that this serves a purpose for what you need. And I'm sure that if you do a good job on writing it up and smile at your teacher, she just might give you an A. Bye to you and your folks, and thank you for asking me. Bye-bye.